I'm your host, Davida Shensky, and you're listening to Live Without Limits, Reach Personal Success on a Daily Basis. The purpose of this show is to talk about personal development, mental health, relationships, and anything that affects your mindset and reaching your personal success and setting goals that are achievable. Today's presentation is titled What's Trauma Dumping? 7 Common Signs and 6 Ways You Can Avoid It. One thing about experiencing trauma is the fact that it demands to be addressed. Otherwise, it haunts us for a very long time. Most of us turn to our friends and families as venting outlets. However, there is a blurry line between venting and trauma dumping. Sadly, not many people as are well aware of what trauma dumping is. This results in them unknowingly pushing away the people they love. So, here are some ways that you can identify trauma dumping to avoid doing it and end up on the receiving end. But first things first, what is trauma dumping? Trauma dumping is the act of unloading one's emotional or psychological trauma onto someone who, without their consent or appropriate boundaries being established, this can occur in many different contexts, such as in relationships or social media or even in casual conversation. While seemingly relieving, trauma dumping can be harmful to both the person doing the dumping and the person receiving it. For the person doing the dumping, it can reinforce a pattern of avoiding personal responsibility and processing their own emotions. They become used to oversharing their trauma and expect assistance from others, thereby failing to develop the skills needed to deal with trauma personally to the person on the receiving end. It can be overwhelming, triggering, and even re traumatizing. Hearing graphic details of someone else's trauma is not anyone's cup of tea, especially when you're not prepared for it. It's important to recognize that trauma is a deeply personal and sensitive topic. Sharing one's trauma can be an important part of healing and growth, but it should be done in a safe and appropriate way. If you feel like you need to share your trauma with someone, always ask for their consent and establish clear boundaries beforehand. Additionally, seeking the help of a trained therapist or counselor can provide a safe space to process and work through your trauma without bruising other social relationships you have. The 7 common signs of trauma dumping, constantly bringing up traumatic experiences or events in conversations, even when the topic is unrelated, overwhelming the listener with graphic details of traumatic experiences, ignoring social cues or verbal boundaries, such as changing the subject or expressing discomfort, not respecting the listener's emotional capacity or well being, or being unwilling to acknowledge the impact of their trauma on others, failing to seek professional help or support, and instead relying on friends, family, and acquaintances to process their trauma, expressing anger or frustration when the listener is unable or unwilling to provide the level of support or validation they desire, making the listener feel responsible for their emotional well being or guilt tripping them into listening or providing support. The 6 ways to avoid trauma dumping. Remember that trauma is a complex and challenging experience, and it's okay to seek help and support by being mindful of how you share your experiences. You can avoid trauma dumping and build healthy relationships with those around you. Seek professional help. It's essential to have a safe space to process your trauma. Consider seeking help from a therapist or counselor who is trained to help you navigate through your experiences. Ask for consent. Before sharing your experiences with someone, make sure they are open to listening. Ask if it's okay to share and let them know that they can set boundaries if they feel uncomfortable. Pace yourself, take breaks, and avoid overwhelming the listener with too much information at once. Try to share our experiences in small increments over time. Use I statements. When talking about your experience, use I statements to focus on your own emotions and reasons. I feel that. I did. I reacted. Now, when you hear these are the beginnings, so finish up the sentences that say, I feel that I was unappreciated. I did not get along with my family members. I reacted to the emotional blackmail that was going on around me. That's how you finish out these sentences. This can help the listener understand that your perspective without feeling like they need to fix the problem. Consider the listener's needs. Be aware of the listener's boundaries and needs. If they seem uncomfortable or overwhelmed, take a step back and give them space. Take responsibility for your own healing. While it's essential to have a support system, it's also important to take responsibility for your own healing. Consider other ways to process your trauma, such as journaling, art, or exercise. You can protect yourself from trauma dumping too. Being on the receiving side of trauma dumping can be overwhelming and exhausting. It can be challenging to know how to respond when someone is oversharing their trauma with you. But we all need to be aware of how we can protect ourselves. Set boundaries. It's crucial to establish your boundaries and communicate them clearly with the person who is sharing their trauma. Let them know that while you know and want to support them, you have your limits to what you can handle. Be firm with your boundaries, and should the other person attempt to overstep them, remind them that you do not have the capacity to take on more than what they have already shared. Encourage professional help. When you notice that someone has a lot bothering them and they can use someone, also encourage them to seek professional help. If they attempt to unload their trauma on you, remind them that although you would like to help, you do not have the capacity. Then go on to point them in the direction of resources like therapy or counseling. Thanks to technology, these are becoming widely available and can be accessed even online. Trauma dumping can happen to all of us, and there is a possibility that we can find ourselves on either side of the coin. It is important to pay attention and to know that we can handle stress and trauma so that we avoid burdening those around us. In addition to seeking help, we can adopt some lifestyle challenges that help us take responsibility of our healing. And the last thing I'm going to say about this is that I grew up in a very dysfunctional family where with a disability, and only after I started studying psychology and mental health was I able to understand what was going on in the family and the family dynamics. But because of my background, I knew people that were friends of mine who had a background. So it was easy for me to talk to them because I knew they had the training to help me. Therefore, my suggestion to you is if you're talking to someone and they don't understand or have the background to be able to advise you, the best thing you can do is seek out help from someone who knows how to help you to deal with those emotions that you're feeling at that moment.